Hi, and welcome to Synchronicity, talk radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Marie Benard, and today we are speaking with Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She is one of the authors of The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life. And Julia is a cognitive neuroscientist and director of the Innovation Lab at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. You may know that as IONS. And she's a visiting scholar in psychology at Northwestern University. She's also the author of Transcendent Mind, which is one of the first academic books to examine paranormal experiences. And her research focuses on precognition and the possibility of time travel, which is really fascinating. So welcome to the show, Julia.
Thanks so much, Marie. It's a great show, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for being with us today. So premonition, like this psychic stuff, according to what the research that you're doing, is kind of like real.
It's kind of like real. Yeah. So just to be really clear, psychic stuff in general, actually, there's ways to define almost every kind of psychic phenomenon that has been reported through the last couple thousand years has a research analog that we can actually look at either in the lab or out in the world. So everything from mediumship, telepathy, psychokinesis, bilocation, levitation, all these things have been looked at by scientists of one degree or another. And precognition is one of those areas that has been largely validated by scientists. So that's kind of interesting. The others are, precognition is probably one of the most is one of the most well-validated psychic gift.
Cool. But there was, for a number of years, there was that $1 million award. If anyone could prove themselves psychic enough that they would win the $1 million, and nobody ever won it. So what are the parameters that you choose to say, okay, this is a valid phenomenon, even though maybe we're not able to predict the Super Bowl results or whatever?
Yeah, that's the James Randi challenge. He was a magician and a skeptic, and he wanted to show that psychic phenomena didn't exist. And so people would actually come to him. Some of my colleagues, in fact, would come to him with scientific evidence, and he would say, well, you may have statistical evidence that psychic phenomena exist, but, try to win the lottery, show me one person who can do this. So the rules were that we had to produce someone who, could run a 2-minute mile. And we were saying, but we've got people who can run 4-minute miles. And he was saying that's not good enough. And so I think a 4-minute mile is pretty spectacular. Mm-hmm. So it's that kind of thing. It's just that was where his bar was. And I don't think we need to, he dropped that challenge, by the way, a couple of years back. I don't think we need to worry too much about that. To me, what's more interesting scientifically is that, in fact, the evidence is pretty clear for precognition that people have access to information about future events, and that it's largely through unconscious means. And that explains that is a good part of the explanation for why people don't think this happens, because they're not conscious that they're doing it for the most part.
Now, I think it was the foreword, which is written by Dr. Dean Radin, if I'm saying his name right, he kind of compares it to the weather forecast. So there are a lot of ways that they can predict the weather, but then there's a lot of unknown variables and things that change, which is why half the time the weather report is accurate and the other half it's not.
Well, the weather report is, sorry, I'm a stickler for details, but the weather reports are generally now more often accurate than not. I would like precognition in the general public to get up to the level of a weather report. We're not there yet. We are having statistically significant results, so we know something's going on, but the effect is small when it's spread over the general population. Certain people tend to be particularly skilled at predicting future events, either unconsciously or consciously, kind of like particular people are pretty good at predicting the weather. Although those people who are predicting the weather, they can use computer algorithms and all sorts of other tools to help them out, all sorts of great weather software and hardware. When someone's using precognition, we actually don't know. My background's in cognitive neuroscience and experimental psychology. We don't know how they're doing it. it makes it pretty tricky because if someone's skilled at a precognitive task and you give them 100 trials of something and they're performing above chance, you still don't know on which trials they were guessing and they guessed correctly, and on which trials they were actually using precognitive skills such as they are. So it's a tricky problem to solve, and it hasn't been solved yet, but it doesn't mean people don't have ideas about it.
So it sounds like the research you're doing shows some people are better than just random chance, but it's not like, oh, the person's getting 80% of the questions right.
80% it's a pretty high number. There are people who are that skilled, and usually they're making money as what I call in the book with Theresa Chung, we call them positive precogs. So people who are using their precognition to try to do positive things in the world, either working with law enforcement or anti-terrorism or even corporations. But the people I know who are that skilled have a rule that they will only work with corporations when they get a promise that the corporation will donate a certain amount to charity. So it's kind of a neat group of people who actually have used their precognition in a way to shape their spiritual and human development progress to where it really matters to them that they're doing good in the world.
Cool. So these people that are working, I mean, we hear about, was the show Medium or with Ghost Whisperer? There was the woman who was working with the police, and it was based on a true person. Mm-hmm. How many of those are out there? Because they seem to kind of be under the radar.
Yep. We don't know how many are out there. Many of them are under the radar necessarily. And this is actually a big piece of why we wrote the book is that precognition, though it's scientifically validated in a general sense and certainly in certain very skilled individuals, it is still considered taboo because there's this on the scientific side, there's a lot of people who don't know the literature. A lot of most scientists think it doesn't exist and that it's pseudoscience. They don't know the literature supporting it. And on the other hand, on the public side, non-scientist side, you've got people who feel that it's really titillating and weird and taboo, and it could be the devil's work. And so either way, you're kind of up against it with trying to point out that this is a real human skill. You can develop it, and it's okay to use it. And in fact, it's probably necessary for human development to move on from where we are, to use this skill to help us get out of some of the jams that we're in. So I think that shows like that will end up, hopefully, I mean, it depends on how the show is executed, but hopefully shows like that will end up helping people understand that this is like music. This is like a musical skill, and you can practice it. You can get better at it. And certain people are going to be born with a bigger gift than others, but everyone can learn how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the piano. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to get out there into the world. And people who are actively working with law enforcement often don't toot their own horn because, frankly, they don't want to get the agencies in trouble that they're working with. They might have signed a confidentiality agreement, but even if they haven't, it feels a little dangerous out there to say, hey, I do this, and people might say you're doing something bad somehow. And so we want to get rid of that myth.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julia. Right now we're speaking with Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She co-authored The Premonition Code with Theresa Chung, and it's all about the science of precognition and how sensing the future can change your life. Do you have a website specifically for The Premonition Code?
Yeah, it's called thepremonitioncode.com or just premonitioncode.com. Either one will take you to it. And if you're interested in hearing more about the website, I can tell you about the premonition code training we have for positive precogs, which is free.
Cool.
And we spent a chunk of time developing that and designing it for the website. So it's a pretty in-depth process that we're hoping the whole world can use.
Oh, I would love to know more about that. Yes.
Okay, cool. So if you go to thepremonitioncode.com and you click on Positive Precog Training and you register with your email address, you get access to a classroom where you can read about different organizations that support precognition and precognition research. Also a bunch of videos about precognitive remote viewing. We could talk about remote viewing if your listeners want to know what that is. And precognitive remote viewing is getting access to information about events that no one knows what the events are until the future. And there's also the training and testing section where you could be part of a global experiment where you can click on the future button. There's a button called See the Future, and you click on it, and it brings you through a 6-step process that we explain more in the book, but it outlines it on the website. And it takes you through the 6-step process where you put yourself into a state where you're able to access information about what is the future picture that you'll see. And then it asks you, sorry about that, it asks you to choose between 2 graphs that represent 2 possible different future target images based on what you accessed when you were in that state. So you have to commit to one or the other graph, and then it tells you if you were right. So it's a way of giving you feedback. A lot of the precognition practice that's not rigorous doesn't give you feedback. So you try to predict what, for instance, people might ask you to try to predict what's the best course of action in a certain situation. So should I take this job or not? The problem with that kind of precognitive practice is that you never really know if you were right. There's no way to figure out if you were correct. And so this kind of practice actually tells you you were wrong, you were right, and then you can go again. Because unless you can fail at something, you can't get better at it. So this is an opportunity to learn how you're failing and then to learn how to succeed. So it's a fairly rigorous random number generator controlled process, and no one ahead of time can predict what the image will be.
Cool. And that's free?
Yep.
Ooh, good fun. So premonitioncode.com or thepremonitioncode.com. You can check it out there. That reminds me of, there's a study, I don't know if they're still doing it, but HeartMath was doing a study where supposedly the heart can actually predict like half a second before our brains can.
Yes, in fact, that study is one among 26 similar studies that I analyzed in a meta-analysis that got a lot of attention in 2012. We looked at all sorts of studies that are just like that, and they all seem to indicate that different physiological systems, whether it's the heart or any other EEG, gut motility, skin conductance, even measures, fMRI measures, seem to show that there's this information about, depending on the system, between 1.5 and 10 seconds prior to the event, your body knows what's going to happen before you do.
So obviously you don't know exactly why this is happening or what it is, but just from your experience and your intuition, what do you think our bodies and our minds are picking up on when we are doing precognition?
So that's a great question. And of course, yes, I have to reiterate that we don't know. There's some theories out there. I also want to point out that general intuition is kind of let's back up a little bit and put precognition in context. So there's general intuition that people have. Like, I have an intuition that when I go to work today, my friend will be mad at me or something. Let's say that's a general intuition. Now, that intuition, you don't know if that's an intuition that comes because your unconscious mind or even your conscious mind has processed what happened the previous day and sort of goes, they're probably a little mad at me because of this. You might not be conscious of it, and you still could have unconscious cues that are coming in and giving you information. And that's sort of general intuition based on subconscious processing or conscious processing. Precognition is a little different, but it's still considered a form of intuition. So precognition is where literally no one on the planet could predict what the future event is. There are no cues. There's no sensory cues. There's no inferential cues, which means there's no way logic can be used to predict the future event. It's literally blind to everyone on the planet in the present moment. And the only way to get the information is by using precognition. So for example, if I put you in front of a computer and I ask you to describe the picture I'm about to show you, and you describe it pretty well, and then after you describe it, I have a random number generator choose among thousands of images, and it shows you an image, and your description matches the image. There was no way you could have done that without precognition, because the random number generator, first of all, is random, and second of all, was only employed to pick the image after you figured out what you were experiencing. And so that just to be clear, that's what we're talking about with precognition. And in terms of how does that work? So there's many ideas, but it seems to me, and it seems to several people in the field, that there's clearly a mind component and there's clearly a body component. And the mind component may have something to do with an extended mind, so mind that extends beyond space-time. We tend to think in linear space-time terms when we're thinking of physicality, but it's not clear how mind works, if mind is constrained to the physical limits of space-time or if it's beyond that. And if it's beyond that, then you could easily see how, if you could transcend space-time with your mind, that you might be able to get information that in physical reality would be difficult to get, right? That's one explanation. But then, in the past 15 or 20 years, physicists have been producing results in the lab showing that in the physical world, you can have events that happen in the future that seem to influence something that happened in the measurements that have been taken in the past. So there's a whole new sort of heating up of literature in physics in the world of quantum retrocausality. And recently there's a whole new heating up of ideas about quantum mechanical effects in biological systems, such as in birds and in plants. Previously, it was thought that in biological systems, quantum mechanical effects couldn't exist because they were too hot and too complex. So anyway, it's looking like in the physical world now, you really could tell a story about how events in the future could influence those in the past, which is very similar to saying that here in the present, we might be getting information from the future, but without knowing it consciously for the most part. So those are some ideas. Sort of spiritually, how I think about it, or from a human development sense, which I think is most interesting to most people. I think about it as creating a relationship with your future self. And I think it's really rewarding. I mean, from my experience and also the experience of others that I've talked with about this, who are positive precogs, or what I would call, or what Theresa would call, my co-author, would call positive precogs. We really have this sense of connecting with yourself over time, which is an extremely strengthening experience. There's so much cultural emphasis on the now, but connecting with yourself over time, you feel like I don't have to have everything right now because I will exist in the future and I've existed in the past and different things happen at different moments. And it's very relaxing. And it's hard for me to put into words, but I will try how, if that's interesting to you.
Yeah. So this is the quantum retrocausality, changing things in the past, or just
no, I'm just talking about the sort of more spiritual interpretation.
Okay.
Yeah, because we don't know what's going on physically. We don't have a good mechanistic explanation. Physicists are confused right now about what time is, whether time exists or not. Philosophers are thinking that time exists for the most part, but they're confused about whether it's entirely subjective or objective. There's a lot of, like in this next century, there's going to be a lot of figuring out about what time is, as far as I could tell from the indications of the different fields and how they're starting to grapple with issues about time.
Well, they're just even with like developing GPS, they had to make adjustments because time farther away from the planet is different.
Right. And so that's related to relativity. And that's been known for 100 years. So that's not even that, like, we're just starting to grapple with that. And so that's easy to grapple with in comparison to these questions of can you get information or send information back to the past or get information from the future? And if so, what does that say about time?
Well, can you give us an example of, because you mentioned that it seems like things that have happened in the now or like in the present time have influenced things from the past. Are there any stories of, like, what do you mean by that?
Do you mean in terms of physics?
Well, what is it that is changing from the past? Are you talking about like the waves and the particles, or is this like an actual event?
Yeah. So changing isn't, so when you start, here's the thing, when you start talking about influencing the past from the future. Influencing ends up being a better word to convey this than changing, because changing suggests that it was one thing that got measured, and then later it was another thing in the past that got measured. But that's not how these experiments are done. So let me sort of give an example of an experiment. There's something called a delayed choice experiment. And if you're really interested in this, you should Google delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, which is even more convincing. But I think it's easier just to explain the delayed choice experiment. So in a delayed choice experiment, an experiment in quantum mechanics, it usually uses a setup with some half-silvered mirrors. And what that means is half of the photons, let's say there's photons, half of the photons or the particles that are going to these mirrors reflect off of them and half of them go through. So if you do one particle at a time, it'll either go off or go through. That's when you think about a particle as like a little billiard ball. But of course, particles are also waves, so it also goes through and reflects at the same time. But the interesting thing is you can change whether it acts like a particle by either bouncing off or going through, or a wave by going through and bouncing off simultaneously, by in the future path of the particle, after the particle has supposedly already made the decision to bounce off or go through both. In the future path of the particle, you can change something. You can change a measurement, and that'll switch whether or not the particle was behaving like a particle or a wave in the past. And when I say switch, what I mean is you'll go back and notice the measurements and recognize that the particle was either, the photon, let's say, was either a particle or wave-like in the past. So the easier way to say this, and sorry, I have a visual image that it's easier to convey with a picture, but the easier way to say this is that there's two events, 1 and 2, and when you do event 2, event 1 should have already happened, and you should already have no way of changing it. But what happens is when you do event 2, event 1 can shift in the sense of it goes in one direction or another according to whatever you choose at event 2. So now a bunch of physicists are starting to write about how. So like Hugh Price, he's H-U-W Price I think he's at Oxford or Cambridge, I forget. But anyway, physicists are starting to write about how thinking about retrocausality, causing things in the past, can actually help get us out of all sorts of problems that quantum mechanics brings. Like you can deal with the problems of entanglement using retrocausality, which is really interesting. So anyway, what we're experiencing right now is a revolution, I believe, in our understanding of time and of causality. And I think things are going to be shifting. But what I know for sure, I'm not a physicist, what I know for sure in the world of physiology and in psychology, it is clear that unless people continually do the wrong experiment, and we don't know why it's wrong, there are bits of information from the future that are making their way back to the past. And this could be because, in my opinion, it is likely because the rules of mental space do not behave like the rules of physical space.
Sounds very complicated and above my head, but I appreciate you taking the time to try and
I'm sorry.
Explain.
I could do better with a picture.
So I'm curious. Right now, we are speaking with Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She is co-author of The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life. And if you want to practice and train on how to be what they call a positive precog, you can go to their website, thepremonitioncode.com. And there's a free training area there.
That's right.
So there's so many things. If we can predict the future in some way, or if we can influence the future or even the past in some way, how is that changing people's lives now?
Yeah. So I can give you an example of a friend of mine who has taught himself how to see future events on a regular basis, and he started working with the FBI after 9/11 to look into some anti-terrorism try to see if he could be helpful with anti-terrorism work. And so he did that for a while and then decided not to do that anymore, although they seem to really feel that he was helpful. So that's nice. But he has now noticed changes in himself where he feels completely unafraid. So it's ironic because a lot of people, when they hear about this, they think, oh, I don't want to know the future because I don't know when I'm going to, get sick, or a friend's going to get sick or die, or I'm going to die. But it's exactly the opposite. The more you practice this in a controlled way and in a conscious way, and with a sense of love and acceptance for yourself and others, the more you become not afraid. You recognize that you have a whole long life, and when you die, then that's the end of your life. That's the end of your body, and something about it, and I wish I understood more, because I have a keen interest in researching unconditional love, which I think is a big part of this. But something in you starts to love all the times at which you exist. It's like all of yourselves throughout time feel connected like beads on a string. And it's like it's like my 2-year-old self is as much with me as my 80-year-old self. And he reports that same experience, and it's very relaxing, and it leads to this sense of inner peace that I think is really profound. And it's helpful. And you have a sense that when someone schedules a meeting that is going to be canceled, because you have that intuition, you trust your intuition, and it's canceled. Not always. No one's 100% correct, but it makes your life a lot easier on just really mundane kind of silly ways that actually make things much more easeful for you.
Thank you for that, Julia. So I think we've all had those experiences where we get a sense of, oh yeah, that person is going to be an hour late, or that meeting is going to be canceled, or this relationship is going to tank. But I just, okay, we won't get into that. But anyway, I just about opened
the most important stuff.
I just got dumped yesterday by. It was
good for you. Yeah. Good for you. Good for you.
So, anyway,
so I say,
yeah, sending love. But anyway, we all have had these experiences. So, but we don't track them, and it can be difficult to feel like, oh, well, I felt like that was something that I predicted, and how do we know that these predictions are actually things that we're picking up on from the universe, or they're things that maybe are what's the word that we like kind of make it happen, like self-fulfilling prophecy.
Self-fulfilling prophecies, yeah. There's like wishful thinking, there's self-fulfilling prophecies, and then there's like universal messages, right? And people are always trying to sort those three things out. So okay, so there are different kind of voices, and this is what I love. When people start practicing controlled precognition, I teach a class in this too, and what I love is watching students try to sort this out, because this is a lifelong path. It really is a practice. I mean, it's like meditation. You get to know your own mind, and the more you do it, the more you get to know your own mind. And I don't think it stops. I don't know when it stops, but I don't think it stops. I think people who do this for 30 years are still getting to know their own minds. But there's different voices, or there's different voices isn't a good term, because it sounds like I'm hearing voices, and that's not the case. But there's different qualities of these aspects. The quality of wishful thinking tends to be insistent, like, ooh, I'm going to win the lottery. I'm going to win the lottery. Mm-hmm. Almost egoic. Like, look what I did, or look what I'm going to do. Then there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that tends to be a little obsessive. I'm going to fail the test. I know I'm going to fail the test. I know I'm going to fail the test. I'm so nervous about the test that I'm not studying for the test. Well, okay, you're going to fail the test, Mm-hmm. Sort of obsessive. And the intuition that comes from precognition, or intuition that comes from other sources, tends to be the still small voice. And it just maybe says something in a knowing way. It's very knowing. Like, I'll tell you a story of this. A woman who came to one of my talks at a bookstore. It was a Barnes & Noble, I think, in Illinois. And she came late, but at the end she she came up afterwards and she said, I don't know why I came into this bookstore. I just had a knowing that I should. But I'm getting a book for a friend of mine who, when her daughter was 6 years old, had a birthday party for her daughter. Her daughter was totally healthy, had a birthday party for her daughter, and she received a dress in a box. And the mother looked at the dress, and in her head came the words, totally unbidden and completely without doubt and also without malice, "My daughter will be buried in that dress."
Oh, God.
Which is you would think would be horrible, but her experience of it was such knowing and such a factual piece of information that she felt like it was preparing her, like it was protecting her. Like now she would take her daughter to the doctor. Now she would find out what was going on, and they found a brain tumor, and their daughter was buried in that dress 6 months later. But she felt the whole time that the universe was telling her, like, this is the situation, this is the fact, without emotion, and that allowed her to prepare. So this is why when people get scared to know the future, then they'll not be able to hear what's true. But if you just allow what's true to come in, it actually isn't scary, even though it could be horrible, devastating news. It's a preparation. It feels like a gift.
Wow, that was heavy.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I mean, this is the thing. If it helped her to process and maybe probably if she hadn't had that premonition, she wouldn't have had that time to spend with her daughter. She wouldn't have got it checked out. Right. And
she wouldn't have had the time.
Yeah.
So it's a big difference.
Wow. So how has it changed your life?
Well, I don't know, because since I was a kid, I've always had these I've mostly started in the form of dreams, and then it became waking experiences. The more I would write down my dreams and tell myself, okay, this is not, I don't need to hide this. I can write this down, and I can study this like I can study anything else. The more it shows up. And so I don't know that it's changed my life, but I can tell you that the more I've paid attention to it, this I can tell you, the more I have paid attention to it and studied it and allowed it, and also, by the way, said out loud to the scientific community, this is what I'm studying, and too bad if it hurts my reputation. The more I've been able to come out of the closet about it and to myself and others, the more I feel clarity that this is a practice that humanity, that people, I won't say humanity, it sounds too grandiose, but that many people could benefit from. And I think it's a step in our human development that we actually start using this on a regular basis and training our children in it in a thoughtful way.
Wow. Yeah. Training. Well, I think that, children do tend to be more intuitive, and sometimes they will just say these like profound things that adults don't even think of because we're so busy, caught up in our habits.
Yeah. And also kids haven't yet really been told, depending on their age, haven't yet really been told that things in the future, you can't know them. And so that takes time for us to learn that we're not supposed to be able to know stuff in the future.
So that's one of the things in the book. You kind of have a list of traits and qualities that people who tend to be just more naturally talented at precognition might have. And the belief that that's possible is one of them.
Yeah, there's 3 traits. Now these there's more traits, but I tend to be kind of conservative when writing about this for the public. So I only cited traits in there that had been shown in 2 or more studies to be tied to precognitive performance, not just self-reports of precognitive dreams, for instance, but actually go into the lab and your precognitive performance is higher. Seems to be associated with the character trait of openness to experience. So are you interested in experiencing new things? Do you have an artistic bent? Are you intrigued and curious rather than afraid of new information? So openness to experience seems to be correlated more than once significantly with precognitive ability in the lab. And then the other, besides belief, which is definitely correlated with precognitive ability, the other is extroversion, which is how outgoing are you? How much do you want to go get energy from being with others? How much do you want to go be social? And just so if anyone listening isn't either of those things, just so you know, these are significant but small correlations. So there's plenty of people who will be introverts and who are not open to experience, who are still good at precognition. It's just a general trend. And the belief piece, though, is very important. What I find really interesting is that this is kind of an interesting self-fulfilling prophecy. You can find skeptics about precognition and you give them a precognitive task, and sometimes they'll be scoring significantly below chance. In other words, they're proving to themselves precognition doesn't exist by actually going in the opposite direction in a significant way, which is interesting because if you think about it, what that means is some part of them must know the correct answer and they have to answer the other one.
Yeah. That's funny. Well, and they say, I think I read this in possibly a Brene Brown, something recently, where statistically you actually are, if you believe in luck, you will be more lucky.
Yeah, I think it might be a similar type of thing. I haven't read that research, but it's quite possible. On the other hand, how is someone measuring whether someone's lucky? Certainly, if you believe in luck, you will say that you're more lucky. That's because true, you believe in luck. So it's these kind of, but on the other hand, I'd have to read the literature and try to figure out how are they measuring luck. Maybe there was a study saying if you believe in luck and then, do you believe in luck, and then doing some kind of dice rolling task, in which case then you can make that claim. There's a lot of interesting research out there that doesn't see the light of day because, at least in the scientific circles, because people just assume that the individuals who are doing the research can't be rigorous thinkers because they're believing something different than the paradigm assumes.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julia. Again, we're speaking with Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She is co-author of The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life. You can go to thepremonitioncode.com if you want to find out more about the book and if you want to test yourself or train yourself on how to be a positive precog. So what does it mean to be a positive precog?
So we are creating something new with this book called a positive precog. So we defined it as someone who is actively pursuing precognition, controlled precognition, which means they're sitting down as opposed to, just letting their dreams show up every once in a while. They sit down on a regular basis and do the practice of trying to predict future events using whatever means they use. We talk about a practice that is similar to remote viewing, if people have heard of that. But it's someone who is actively trying to pursue controlled precognition, but also is following certain principles that we call the REACH principles. REACH is the acronym. And it stands for respect for the unknown, which is really important because you're delving into the unknown and you need to have respect for it. Ethics in your use of precognition, also very important because you're dealing with people's sensitivities, especially when you're working for clients who have a real need for the information, like missing persons cases, for instance. A stands for accuracy, so you're striving for accuracy. C you're striving for compassion for yourself and others. And H is honesty in all your dealings. So, for instance, you never tell anyone you're 100% accurate because no one is. You never tell anyone that you're the only person who can sense the future because you're not. These kind of things. So we're trying to create a container for people to practice precognition in a way that is safe, it is non-sensationalized, and is scientifically sound. And then hopefully over time, people can train themselves up, and people who become good at this and who really feel that they want to pursue it to help the world, we could form something that I like to call the Positive Precog Council, which I imagine would be a group of precogs who are scientifically vetted, who can help, for instance, the UN or governmental organizations or NGOs figure out solutions to problems that maybe other people don't perceive because they're relying on information about the past to predict the future. When you rely on information about the past to predict the future, you don't predict things that seem to come out of nowhere.
Interesting. There's so many overlapping ideas. I don't know if it was the same book with the luck thing, but it was a book by, I think it was the woman who did, oh my gosh, it's totally escaping me. Where she went to Bali and...
Oh, is that Eat, Pray, Love?
Eat, Pray, Love, yes. So her next book, I think she was talking about how creative minds, it's not like there's this idea that her mind creates. It's that there are these opportunities floating around in the universe, and she opens herself up to tapping into it.
That's right. It's something you access. It feels, let me put it this way. This is not a scientific statement. This is an experiential statement. And it's based on interviewing other people who are very, very skilled at this. And by the way, my skill at this it's better than average, but it's nowhere near as good as I hope it will be in the future, or as good as many of the other people I've talked with about it. But it feels like you're accessing something, not like you're creating something. You feel like... the tapping in phrase is really good. It's a receiving. It's less of a transmitting.
And so one of the things that you recommend people do, in addition to like paying attention to these things and recording their dreams, is meditation.
Yes, meditation. Meditation in 2 studies, I think, or 3, 2 or 3 studies, I'd have to go back and look, by this woman in the UK who's a precognition researcher, Serena Roney-Dougal, did studies with Tibetan meditating monks, and showed that their precognitive abilities in the lab, she was looking at conscious precognition, so actually choosing which of 4 images would be a future event. Their performance on that task increased significantly with the number of hours of meditation. Now, here's a confounding factor. They were also older if they had meditated more in their life. And so it's possible it increases with age. However, I've done that same kind of task, and I haven't seen age influence the performance. So I'm guessing it's meditation. And there's other indications that meditation may improve performance like that. And so to me, it's pretty exciting, because here's something that you can actually control and practice to help you. The other thing, by the way, that helps is practice. It's taking it seriously and deciding that you want to explore this part of your mind. And that really helps.
Cool. So you have a vision for some kind of positive precog group of people who can help the world. What do you see for our future? Because a lot of days it seems a little bleak.
Yep. So I am, when you ask when you say that, are you asking me psychically, or are you asking me scientifically?
However you feel like you want to answer it.
Yeah. So scientifically, I'll do both. Scientifically, it's clear that it's clear to me, based on the past and what's going on now, that this next 50 to 100 years is going to be a revolution in our thinking about what the mind is, and what is the relationship between the mind and the brain, and the mind and the body. So I think that's exciting. I think we're going to be trying to understand time and space, and we're going to understand these other dimensions that the string theorists like to talk about, and other physicists sometimes like to talk about, foundational physics people. So we'll be understanding more about foundational physics. We'll be confused by it more. So that's scientifically what I think is going to be going on. In terms of humanity, humanity is always, we're always, I think the arc of the universe does indeed bend towards love, bend towards positive change. That seems to be the case, as much as people always decry the situation that they're currently in. If you look historically, the improvements have been clear. And I think we'll continue to improve, and we'll make over adjustments, like we've discovered the internet, and now there's problems with the internet and what it has brought. So now we're going to have to adjust to that. It takes time for us to adjust to our own technology. And you could get scared about it, but it's not super helpful. Being afraid doesn't usually motivate people to take action as much as feeling, well, I'm motivated now to do something because I see a positive outcome. Having a positive view of what might happen and working towards that view does motivate people, I think, a lot more than fear to take the kind of action that is actually helpful. So I feel actually very positive about our future. I think there's a lot of really good people who are trying to make change. I think change is slow. I also think, and here's the most trippy thing I will likely say, and something for which I have no evidence, and it's just an intuition. Okay, so you're talking to the psychic part of me,
All
right?
right.
I think we already are doing time travel back from the future to now to tweak various things that are important. And so I feel very protected. I feel very protected by our future selves. I feel that we are keeping ourselves out of nuclear war. I feel like we're keeping ourselves out of climate complete destruction. So I think our future selves are already doing work here and now. So I actually feel very hopeful about the future.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That gives me a little moment of comfort to think about. It's like that movie, I think it's Arrival. Have you seen it?
Only like 1,000 times, yes.
Beautiful, beautiful film. Well, we're just about out of time. We are speaking with Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She is co-author of The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life. You can go to the website, thepremonitioncode.com, for more information and for training in how to be a precog and how to test yourself. So when people go to this site, how much of it is being measured when they're practicing? Like on your end with data and everything?
Oh, well, we look at everything because it's all de-identified, which means we don't know who the people are. But we look at the scores and we try to understand, is there a relationship between, time of day and their scores? Is there a relationship between how much practice they've done and their scores? If for people who are willing to be part of the experiment and live in the U.S., because certain legal things, we can only have people who are part of the experiment live in the U.S., they'll put in they have the option of putting in their age and their gender. We'd like to look at, there's some evidence based on my past research that age and gender have an impact that's a little complex on performance. So we'll look at all those things. Now, in terms of publishing, we can't publish anything except for data from people who have agreed to be part of the experiment. So we'll get more information from analyzing the data than we can publish, and that's standard for most researchers. You publish a small subset of the data and you have a lot more knowledge, but the knowledge guides your next experiment, and so that's really good.
Cool. So if you want to be part of the experiment, you have to be in the US, but if you want to just play around and test yourself, you can be anywhere.
Well, and you can compete. Yeah, you can be anywhere. It's free for everybody. You can compete for the Hall of Fame from anywhere. It's the Hall of Fame is very stringent. So far, there's something like 1,000 trials and something like 700 people on it who have been trying, and no one has qualified for the Hall of Fame yet. It's a stringent, but if the first person who does, I will applaud them.
What do you have to do to be in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, to be in the Hall of Fame, let's see. It's you have to be statistically significantly precognitive. So that means it depends on how many trials you've done. So it counts the number of trials. You have to do more than 30 test trials. So there's practice trials and test trials. And you have to commit to your answer for a test trial because it's going in your record. So, oh wait, I'm just looking at the website right now. There's 1,176 active users, so more than I thought. So you have to do at least 30 test trials. If you do 30, you have to have 73% of them correct. If you do 100, you have to have 62% of them correct. And if you do 400, you have to have 56% of them correct. That's because the statistics change with more trials you do.
Interesting. So I'm assuming, because you had mentioned that there are people out there that are like helping police and helping big corporations. So presumably none of those people are on your website or they'd be in the Hall of Fame, right?
No, some of those people are on my website, but what they have to do, there's a community group for people who are really immersed in this, and we're having conversations. You can get to the community group on the website too. It's in Telegram, and we're having conversations about this. But no, they have to get used to the new protocol. I've created a new protocol with this website, so they have to actually get used to a new protocol. So for them, they're good at it, but they have to get better at it because this is new for them. So it's a nice challenge for them.
Cool. Well, it sounds like you are doing very exciting and interesting work, and I will be checking out the website. Again, the name of the book is The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life. Julia, what do you think you want to leave us with today?
I just like to leave people with the recognition that you are all of yourselves throughout time, from the moment you were born to the moment you die, and maybe before and after, I don't know, but certainly that period of time. And all of you is available for you. So if you're feeling down today, draw on a time of your life when you weren't and when you were feeling really good, and ask for support from that time. And vice versa, if you're feeling really good today, send out love to all the parts of your life where you weren't.
Including the future? Maybe like imagining that there's a future self that's doing way better and can send...
Yeah. Yes. It works great.
Thank you so much for your time. We have been speaking with Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She is co-author of The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life. So go to the website, thepremonitioncode.com, if you want to check out the training and all the testing materials and everything there. I want to thank Julia for being with us today, and I want to thank you for spending this hour with us. I hope that you have a wonderful week. Be well. Namaste.